Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to a Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, Heroes of Shadow and Light, and all kinds of other subtitles tier list review, where I'm going to go over part of the big tier list that I'm making for my Patreons. If there's a game that I'm kind of out of my depth on, such as this game, such as Fate, such as Awakening, sometimes I like to, discuss a little bit with someone, and today Dondon has kindly generously given me some of his time to discuss the FE12 one, because it's a game he's much more familiar with than I am, and a lot of other people are more familiar with it as well. So we're going to go over potential adjustments, things that are probably wrong, and we're going to go over some new units that we might find interesting to discuss. And that's the plan for today. How's it going, Dondon?
Hello, casuals. It's going okay.
Good.
My signature greeting.
So I gave Dondon a couple units that I thought I might discuss, and then I divided all the units I have left into two different tiers here at the bottom. An interesting question mark tier list, tier, and a free silver tier. I think these will make for more interesting discussions, and then these maybe not so much, but it might be interesting to arrange them at some point. The plan is for this video and maybe one or maybe two next ones, depending on how much time we have, to just kind of go over these units, talk about them for a little bit, see how they must be tiered. And I know Dondon has a couple suggestions to make about the units that have already been tiered, moving them up and down the list. And he's prepared some thoughts on the units in here somewhere. Before we do that though, I would like to talk a little bit about FE12 in general, if you're okay with it, because it's like a very different...
Because I also would like to talk about FE12 in general. I don't know what your criteria are for this tier list.
Good one. So it's not really supposed to be for like hardcore LTC. But if someone has to give me a benchmark, it will be like hard to efficient play. That's what I would like. If you put a gun to my head and told me what this tier list is for, that would be it. But honestly, it kind of depends on my mood and like how I want to rank things. I'm not sure if there's characters that will be ranked differently if you change the criteria. Maybe that's something we can get into with specific units that like maybe miss certain benchmarks. But that's just kind of what I aim for. And then for FE12 in general, my approach has generally been, if I know how they function in a certain difficulty, either because I've played with these characters on my own or I've seen them in certain videos, I tend to go according to that. But sometimes I have to kind of theorize it, and I find that really difficult for this game because a lot of units can be a lot of different classes. So the way I tend to go about it is I look at a unit in their joining class and I see how they perform against enemies, and if it works well, it works well, just kind of roll with it. If they need to be reclassed as something obvious, then I kind of take that into account. My favorite example would be Bars, for example. He has better axe rank than other ranks, and Draco Knight is a really good class, so I kind of looked into him as a Draco Knight, and maybe like a Berserker or something. That seems to be the way to go. And that's generally been the theme with males, is you look into a couple common classes they can be, look at their ranks and which ranks match the classes that they can be in. Something like if a unit uses swords, then they generally best off as a horseman, for example, can be kind of okay. Swordmaster can kind of work. Some units work in certain classes despite not having any weapon ranks. For example, I know that Swordmasters can kind of work regardless because they have a base seat in swords. I know snipers can almost always work because they don't take counterattacks anyway, and they have C rank in bows, that kind of stuff. But that's kind of where my knowledge ends, and I'm hoping that that's where your knowledge can come in a little bit to complete the picture a little bit, because there's some units where I'm just not sure what would be the best optimal path for, and some units where I'm like, do they even work even if you give them one of those classes? Like, how do they work, And because you can change them every single chapter as well, I think it changes depending on the chapter. Like, if you're in a chapter where there's a lot of flying dragons, wyverns, you want to be a sniper or a horseman. But if you want them to be good against, I don't know, some other types that they need to be like Swordmaster for to double. And I barely have any experience with that, but I know for like 0% growth for your run, which was on Hard 2, I believe, right? It was a Maniac?
Yeah, so I guess right in the tiering alley for this list. Although we should probably consider a little bit like their function on Hard 3 and Hard 4, just because I get the feeling that Bantu is there in F tier solely because of how terrible he is in Hard 4, where he can't attack anything without just getting killed first. Right?
That's funny. You think he'd otherwise be in like E or something? Like not that much worse than
No,
everything
it's
else?
just... I think there would be other people in F tier if that were the case, if we didn't factor in how abysmal he was on Hard 4. And I think that there are some units that deserve to drop into F tier, but I guess in terms of fixing the minor errors to the major travesties in this tier list, first of all, actually my question is, what's the rule in the Rainbow Potion? Because that actually is a big one.
Yeah,
for a couple of units.
If I'm completely honest, I didn't have a single thing in mind for when it comes to Rainbow Potion. But I mean, if we're thinking about Hard 2, the last time I played that, it was with Rainbow Potion. So I guess if we have to assume one of the two things, and it's a really big thing, it's like +2 in every stat, I believe. That's pretty big for speed and strength and defense in particular, I think. So I would say Rainbow Potion, yes. And then Lunatic stat boosters, I guess, also matter in that case.
Yeah. So I guess maybe like, you know, slightly penalized if you need a Lunatic stat booster or if you absolutely need the Rainbow Potion to function as a unit. And there are some units that like it makes a huge difference towards that I'll probably cover later. But I guess my first suggestion on this list is to maybe put Chris where they rightfully belong, which is above Pala in S tier.
Above Pala. All right, let me scroll up a bit. Okay, this works. All right. Chris above Pala. I can see it. I found it like, I considered it too when I was tiering them. I was like, should it be above or below? My view when it was like Pala flies before promotion, whereas Chris only flies after, specifically the male one. I guess the female one can always fly. But then remember that they both promote like really, really soon. So maybe it doesn't matter. And then Chris has like better stats than Pala. So that sounds about it. That's my perspective on it.
I think that specifically male Chris like has to be above Pala no matter which way you slice it, because male Chris in this game is so much better because of his access. You start off in the prologue as knight or fighter, which female Chris can't do, especially on the higher difficulties where the extra power and the hilarious defense,
depending
like
on which one of the two, Chris, right? But still, like
can matter a lot. And then just the fact that there are really no good axe users in this game that are not male Chris means that like he's so strong that on Lunatic mode and Hard 4 by extension, where they have the same stats, he can go into the section of the game where everyone else is using a dragon killing weapon, and he can just use a silver axe on as a Draco Knight and one round stuff.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm pretty convinced. Also, like, I feel like just the prologue utility alone might just be a really good argument against Pala for Chris, just because she's not around at all and he is.
Yeah.
Which
and I would personally argue female Chris above Pala too, but they're closer than male Chris. Male Chris is like, if there is such a thing as an S+ tier on this tier list, male Chris would be in it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I eliminate the pluses and minuses because I wasn't able to tell the nuances between units enough to make it like worth it. But I can definitely see that. I'm not going to do it right now because it's going to mess up my overlay. But I can see it.
Or like a S double plus, S triple plus tier. Yeah, that's really how amazing male Chris is. And female Chris is like, you know, it's pretty good, right? But you got a whole bunch of other really good female units in this game, and you kind of lose out the unique utility that male units have by being able to reclass into Berserker, most especially because Draco Knight kind of falls off in the late game, and Berserker has pretty good caps all around. And then
mostly strength and speed, right? Chris, for Berserker.
Yeah, speed. And then technically male Chris, I guess, could also go Horseman if you really want him to, whereas female Chris cannot. So, you know, and like you need to have really good stats to make Horseman work in this game, I find. And Chris at least has those stats.
Yeah, because Horseman is like really good caps with really low class bases, I believe, right? So you need a lot of growth basically to make up for it.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Fair. My second proposal is to move Sirius down to the bottom of A tier.
I knew this was coming.
Shift.
I knew this was coming.
Yes.
Okay. So is it the luck, or is there more to it?
I mean, it might be kind of a controversial opinion. I think this is based a little bit more on how well he does on the higher difficulties, like Hard 3 and Hard 4. And you could argue that like because he stands out so much above other units, like most of the rest of the tier list, that's actually a point in his favor. But the problem that I have with him on Lunatic and Lunatic Reverse is that his stats just don't quite measure up to like Chris or Katria or Pala, especially later in the game. And if you look at his averages, like even if you reclass him to Draco Knight and he gets the extra speed growth and he just like gets every single level as a Draco Knight or gets a Swordmaster, like his benchmarks, his like binomial benchmarks and his averages for speed are comparable to Pala's. And Pala is not known for being very fast at the later part of the game because she usually needs like a speed wings to keep up her speed relative to the enemies. And then all of his other stats are like equal or slightly worse, and because he gets fewer levels, he's got a greater variance in his stats to kind of work around. So that means that like there's a good chance that he can end up being screwed in some of his stats later in the game, and then he's just like doesn't really perform all that well from what I find. Like I think the way that Sirius used to be valued really highly was that people either rigged his stats a little bit, or they assumed that he stuck exactly to his averages. And if he doesn't actually do that, then he relatively underperforms later in the game.
Is there something, especially that he like misses? I think kind of benchmarks you can think of. Like, does he miss out on double link, say, ice dragons or wyverns or something late in the game?
So he'll miss doubling benchmarks on some of the human units after chapter 14 later in the game, and also he just overall has like a little bit less bulk than Katria or Chris or even Pala, and or actually even Luke. And then the other thing too is the crit rates, right? Like the
enemy crit rates on him,
yeah, he has terrible luck, and while you can argue that the 2% crit or whatever that he faces can allow for AI manipulation, the converse of that is that he can just die at any moment, and I find it hard to argue that as an overall positive.
I agree.
I mean, maybe we've just been draft racing a bit too much recently, where dying to low % crit rates is a thing, and it will like cost you a run. But it's like if you're just gonna like reset over and over again, sure, you don't really mind like missing or getting crit, and those stats really don't matter at all. But that's one major weakness that Sirius has that the other units don't really have. And you can AI manipulate without manipulating luck and enemy crit rates too, right? You can just put someone that's frailer in range and the enemies will go for them instead. So
there's other ways around it. You have to make the like careful formations, which is really what FE12 is all about, honestly, is making those kind of formations, and they can work without the crit rule, I think. Like just make better formations, bro. So
the other thing I'd say about Sirius too, by the way, there's one more thing, which is there's actually like a very specific way that you have to use him if you want him to be really good in the late game, because he starts pre-promoter and he only gets 19 levels to grow. When you're in the chapter 11 to 14 segment of the game, you actually have to feed him a lot of dragon kills because they give way more EXP than anything else. And after chapter 14, when you're starting to fight human enemies again, Sirius, if he's like, I don't know, level like 14, 15 or so, he gets like very little EXP from fighting enemies at that point.
So he needs to be prioritized for kills. I guess that's also kind of bad if he wants to be good in late game. Okay, so like I'm like 99% sure that you're right about him being in A tier. Like I can see that. The one thing I'm finding weird about your suggestion though is if you put him here, he's lower than Luke, who I feel like is. I mean, I'm not gonna say he's worse stat wise in the long run, but it feels weird to put like a promoted paladin from chapter 5 over a dude that's like an unpromoted dude at that point. But I guess Luke just wins out on like benchmarks, I guess.
I think he's easily the top of A tier, like above Luke. It's just I don't think he belongs in the S tier.
Oh, I thought you were saying put him in the bottom of A.
Units. No, top of A tier.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, but I just don't think he's an S tier unit in this game. Like he starts out really good, but he does not really end all that well, and he doesn't really have all the flexibility that a male unit theoretically could allow for. Like you would pretty much never use him as a horseman because he just doesn't have the stats. And he doesn't have axe rank to go to Berserker, and you don't really have the time to train up his axe rank because you actually need him to be like a Draco using lances for most of the game, or otherwise reclass him to like hero to use swords because he has a pretty good sword rank at base, but he really has no opportunity to train up his axe rank. So he's really just kind of like, in my opinion, he's kind of like a female unit who can go hero.
That's one way to put it. It's the reason he can't train up those ranks is because he generally needs to use lances to get the dragon kills, I assume. Like he needs the dragon pikes and stuff for killing, like getting those kills we were talking about earlier.
So I think in the beginning part of the game, when you first get him, you really want him to use lances because, like, first of all, he'll have an E rank as a Draco Knight in axes, and the silver lance allows him to one-shot thieves, which is really important utility in a couple maps. Yeah, because I think if you see like 0% growths, you can kind of like strength creep against enemy thieves with like weapon ranks and
just to use one of the silver lance early on as well.
Yeah. But if he uses axes, he just is stuck with an iron axe. He doesn't have like the bonker stats to begin with that allows him to destroy everything with an iron axe, in my opinion. So you got to get out of the E rank hell. And then once you're out of E rank hell, you're in D rank hell.
It's like, oh, he gets to use like 3 might hand axes and steel axes. I mean, steel axes are like okay, but he's probably still not one rounding with it.
Exactly right. You need Chris tier strength to be one rounding stuff with the steel axe.
That's fair. All right, I'm happy with that. I can work with that.
All right.
Next biggest.
The next biggest travesty on this tier list is is Ceda is a whole tier too low. I think.
Ooh, this is an interesting one because
Yeah.
I think at one point she was an A and I lowered her a little bit because I think a lot of people felt like she was too high. The general consensus that I've heard about Ceda is that she's like not as good as these guys, but like she's the next best unit you want to use basically. And like I've talked a lot about how the wing spear is much worse in this game compared to Shadow Dragon because it just doesn't obliterate anything that's even remotely a threat. You have like much more enemy diversity and everything, and the forging is also more competitive. I guess it's more things you want to forge, so it's like a bigger opportunity cost to make the wing spear. And also like in a lot of chapters there's just nothing for her to kill, and then she's also worse in like bulk compared to say these units. But I guess it doesn't justify her being in B tier, it just justifies her being in A tier, I guess, rather than S tier. So I guess
because I see someone that fits the bill we're describing, and that's Luke. And so it doesn't make sense that Luke and Ceda are different tiers. I think Luke overall is better and has a better late game, but Ceda has a much better early game than Luke does. And Ceda also has some prolonged utility. But the thing is that it depends on what difficulty you're looking at too, because I guess in hard 1, it doesn't really matter all that much. Ceda, everyone that's good is already fast enough to destroy everything. But once you start going to hard 2, Ceda's speed is really helpful because she doubles things for free. And then on Lunatic, she is one of the few people that actually will double things for free. Like everyone else, you have to kind of work a little bit at it. I guess Chris and Katria don't really, and Pala needs the speed wings, Sirius might need the speed wings. But Luke, for example, is someone who is really borderline on doubling for the entire game. Like he's also one of those units where you actually have to stick to his averages and not really get screwed on anything in order for him to function super well. But Ceda, at least, you know that she's going to double everything. And even though her strength is really bad, and forges do not destroy everything in this game, they do target a whole bunch of enemies.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's like a subset of enemies that Ceda is very bad against, and there's a subset that she's very excellent against. So, but she is definitely like one of the units that if you are just going to pick a group of 5 or 6 that you just automatically use every run, Ceda's one of them.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I was gonna say like it's probably fine for a unit to be really good against some enemies and really bad against others, because that's kind of the way you play this game a lot of the time. Unless you're like an absolute juggernaut like Chris, you kind of have to be working like that. So I'm down with that. I also feel like when you're playing on lower difficulties like hard 1 and normal, having bulk is generally, I wouldn't say it's all you need, but it's like more important. But when you're playing on Lunatic, I think almost everyone dies in like a low number of hits anyway. So the importance of speed is a bit higher. So I can definitely see the logic. It's just I don't have the experience to back this up, so I'm just gonna take your word for it. But that's kind of like it falls in line with what I know, so I'm definitely inclined to agree here. So do you think it should be right below Luke or right ahead of Luke, basically around that area?
Honestly, I don't know. I think if you're weighing some of the lower difficulties, I think Luke is higher. If you're more heavily weighting like Lunatic mode, maybe Ceda's a little bit better, because on Lunatic mode, that's where the speed difference really makes a difference between the two units. Whereas on a lower difficulty, Luke just has all around better stats and better class access, and is overall probably going to turn out better in every way.
All right, I'm just gonna go with this then. I don't really mind a difference of like 1 or 2 units or like 1 or 2 places that much. So I'm just gonna put it like this. That's fair.
Yep. All right. Next suggestion is to move Arran down to the top of B tier.
Ah, wait. So you moved this first pre-promo paladin down, and you moved the second pre-promo paladin down. Are you okay? Or is this you?
I know what.
Is this you?
I love Jagen's. Right. Otherwise, Jagen wouldn't be my avatar. But the problem in this game with Arran is that he exists for 9 chapters and then he is done. Right? Like, and he is pretty good for the first half of those 9 chapters, and just he kind of exists for the latter half of those 9 chapters.
He's just a promoting unit, basically, right? That's basically his utility.
Correct.
That's
Correct. It's not like, it's not even like FE6 Marcus, where FE6 Marcus is really good for the first 8 maps, and then he's still pretty okay for like 5, 6 maps if you include the guidance, and then chapter 13 is where he kind of falls off, but you can still deploy him because you can't reclass in FE6.
Yeah, so your next best character deployment would be like, I don't know, like Noah or something, which is like not that much of an upgrade.
Right.
If at all.
Arran, after chapter 9, gets pretty much entirely invalidated, because that's when your entire team should really promote, unless you have someone that you're reserving for the Elysian Whip after chapter 11.
You have enough seals at that point? You do, right?
Yeah, you should.
Okay.
You should. I mean, you might have like 1 unpromoted unit left at that point, but you should have you have Chris, Pala, Katria should probably be promoted. You have Sirius, right? So you have 4 promoted units by then, And then if you're going to do staff shenanigans, you've got like Wendell and whatever. So Arran doesn't really matter after that point. I guess I use him in chapter 10 usually because he can go to like Berserker because I don't have a Berserker at that point, and he can just take up a class slot that no one else is using to cross the river and bonk a bishop. But after that, Arran is he falls off the map. And so that's one point against him. And the second is, if you think about like, is he really all that good in beginning the game, right? Like this is a game with Chris. You're coming out of prologue, and Chris is already probably gonna be bonkers. And so Arran is like already competing with secondary Jagan to begin with. And his only advantage at that point is that he has access to promoted classes, including, I don't know, like Sniper and Draco Knight for the first couple maps. So he is pretty good in like 1 to 3. And then you get a Master Seal in chapter 3.
That's right. But do you think it actually makes him... I guess it takes away unique utility that he would have as, for example, Draco Knight. But generally, I don't find you have this other good unit is a very good argument for moving someone else down, because they could still be almost as good or better than all your other units. I guess it makes him relatively worse in the complete ranking of all your units. Like if you rank all your units from best to worst in chapter, say 2, he'd probably be maybe right on top, maybe right below Chris in that one, depending on how much you value Draco Knight, right? But I don't know, is that an argument for moving someone down? Is there not, like, is there unique utility to being a Jagan, or is there room for 2 really good units? I feel like there would be room for 2 really good units.
Well, after chapter 3, it's going to be 3 really good units because you get Pala. And then after chapter 4, it's 4 really good units because you have Sirius. So Sirius, Pala, Chris, and then Arran is the worst of the 4 after chapter 4. So this is like after 3 and 3X, which is whatever. I don't know how much you want to count this chapter because it's trivially easy. But like after 4 chapters, right, you're already the 4th best unit on your team, more or less.
Okay. Fair enough.
And yeah, I mean, like think about it this way, right? Like imagine if at the start of the game you had 3 other units. Like imagine at the start of the game everyone was like Arran, right? That's going to decrease Arran's value. Like you're not going to rank Arran as highly because everyone else is as good as him. So this is kind of the scenario that we have where it's not at the very beginning of the game, but it's like 4 chapters in. You've got 3 other people that are as good as Arran. So does that devalue Arran? And in my opinion, it does.
Okay. You know what? Your logic has convinced me. We'll move him down. Worse than Marth? Better than Marth?
I put him above Marth.
But Marth?
But Mars? All right. The next, in my opinion, travesty of
Injustice
on this list is Katarina. Katarina's way too high, man. I don't know what you were smoking when you put her in
your fucking playthrough. That's why.
Where I like gave her all that, where she like got high on the spirit dust and had to rig like 2 crits to actually even beat the game.
I think you're not the only one to say this. There was a lot of people in the comments who were like, "How is she above Linde alone by 2 tiers?" Because she's just like almost the same thing, but 0% growth. I'm fine with this. Sure. How far should she go down?
I think bottom of B is reasonable. The reason is like Katarina is interesting in the sense that I think on lower difficulties she's actually pretty good because she can like instantly reclass a Swordmaster and just 11 sword everything and 1-round stuff, and you can maybe save like a stat booster or 2 for her. But her bases still don't really hold up compared to everyone else's that you've trained at this point in the game. On higher difficulties, you do need to give her stat boosters, and then like on lunatic mode, she's just bad unless you specifically withhold resources to invest in her with a specific goal of her being able to beat the game for you, to like get the Falchion or something like that, or to get like the super Thoron Forge to try to crit Medius twice at the end of the game. Those kind of things, right? Like beyond that kind of cheese, you're not really using her for a whole lot. Maybe she's like Nosferatu tanking like 1 or 2 things. I know that on hard 4 0% growths, right? You give her like all of the Seraphros, so she gets a 60 HP, and then she has to like Nosferatu crit Medius or something crazy like that.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's
he's not surviving him otherwise. He has like 2 range and he doubles everyone. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and on hard 4 he attacks you first if you attack him.
Yeah. So
the theory is actually that you use that to your advantage. He attacks you first, you Nosferatu crit him, gain our HP back, and then he attacks you again. but outside of those like very specific scenarios, overall as a unit, like Katarina is not super good. She can warp on a lower difficulty, so that kind of gives her some utility there as well, which is why I think bottom of B is reasonable, and any lower might be pushing a little bit. But yeah, that seems to be a little bit closer to where she is. And I guess to complete addressing the other half of this travesty, I think Linde needs to go up.
Okay, to the same level of Katarina.
So I would put her between Arran and Marth, probably.
Okay, that's
because
that's very specific.
So yeah, so it's interesting because I don't like using Linde at all, and her performance also highly depends on, probably amongst all the units on this tier list, are the most dependent on difficulty, access to the lunatic stat boosters, and access to the rainbow potion.
Yeah, I remember she really needs a rope to like survive at all on, I think, lunatic. So that's one.
Yeah,
way.
exactly. So if she doesn't get that, then it actually gets really challenging for her. And like I've really struggled using her without that robe. And with that robe, then she at least survives single hits. And when she survives single hits, she can like counter them with aura, and then she can finish them off with the second hit of aura, and gain a lot of EXP from the Draco Knights, predominantly in Chapter 3, right? Because she needs a lot of EXP to get going too. Her base level is like 1 or 2 or something.
Yeah, it's really
crazy low like that. Yeah. But then later in the game, when she gets going and she actually gains a bunch of speed and maybe some magic, then you can throw her into a pile of enemies and just Nosferatu tank through all of them. Or even later in the game, when the stage speed cap isn't good enough, then you can switch her to Swordmaster and just 11 sword everything and still kill everything that way. But her durability is always going to be kind of suspect. And I think she used to be a lot better before we knew how to do the rescue skip in Chapter 15.
Oh yeah, because you had to like kill the paladins to make sure you get through.
Because you had to like actually throw someone to a pile of enemies to kill all of them. But now you just go, haha, Zane crosses water like that.
Because he like goes on a water tile, transforms into someone else, and then walks on the land. Yeah, I remember.
Correct.
Or used to rescue staff.
I don't have a lot of experience with using Linde, unfortunately, but a lot of the people that are more experienced at the game than I am really rate her super highly. I think on a lower difficulty, the fact that she has unlimited Nosferatu book doesn't matter as much when other people are just bulky to begin with, and her Nosferatu book is limited in uses. Granted, there's a lot of Nosferatu that you can get in the game, but it's still fundamentally limited, whereas like Katria and Pala and Chris and whatever, they just don't take damage.
Yeah, definitely. I think you get one Nosferatu just from our inventory at the start, and I remember you get at least 2 throughout the game, one of them being like kind of after the whole dragon map and everything, but relying on Nosferatu alone to survive, it has all sort of a lot of limitations, right? It means you can't use a stronger tome at that point or anything, you can't use forges or whatever, but I do think that Linde has a substantial amount of unique utility because you can use Nosferatu Aura, have really strong 1-2 range, especially 2 range that a lot of units don't really offer, besides like reclassing the sniper, and hitting on res as well is just a really big damage boost. So I do think that it's fair to value her highly for being able to do that, because you don't really get anyone else who can pull off magic like that early on. Like when you get Ubello, you get Merrick later who can use, like, I guess Wendell is like the closest thing to competition for her in that niche.
Etzel, I guess.
Yeah, he's like a little bit later too. At that point, you've already had Linde for like 9 chapters or something. So I can see why people value her this much. I enjoy using her. I find that like if you have a unit with somewhat bad stats, then Linde's build is one way to kind of make up for it, where you can kind of train from a safe distance without getting attacked like by counterattacks. Just having high accuracy, 1-2 range is really nice for training like that. But it's always hard to gauge exactly how much the unit is really contributing and how much is just trying to feed them, right? Like, how much is Linde really helping you early on? But I think, for example, hitting the Armor Knights in Chapter 6 with a strong aura is something that is pretty highly valued, which is also kind of thing where that Ceda, for example, does really well. So
maybe. Yeah. I honestly think that most of Linde's existence before like Chapter 11 is totally self-improvement, because she doesn't have mobility, right? So she's hanging around behind everyone else and picking up scraps, but she's not really leading the charge. And in my opinion, if you're not leading the charge, you're not really helping all that much. Like, I know that, for example, in Chapter 7, what you do with Linde is that you bait that fire dragon to appear in a cave.
Oh, yeah.
And then you try to set up the kill with her, because she does a lot of damage to it with aura. So she gets a lot of EXP from that, but she gets like that kill, and then she might kill reinforcement by the end of the map, and that's all she does. She's not like blitzing the thieves and actually getting all the important stuff like the Seraph Robe and the Master Seal and the Scorpio Shard and the Bullion. And There's something else that they drop, but I
yeah,
don't
just
anymore.
getting a lot of expensive items that would otherwise escape or kill Navarre or Fina or something. Like absolutely, she doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
She's usually not very involved with main objectives. It's just sometimes there's like, I think most of the time, like basically what I was saying, you can feed a unit like that pretty easily, but it's mostly self-improvement. And then occasionally there's something unique that you can do, like attack that fire dragon or hit an enemy that's like somewhere that we need like a lot of single damage, magical aura damage stuff. But it's kind of rare. Okay, fair enough.
All right.
Travesty averted?
Travesty averted.
Right.
My next proposal is a very small change, but it's to move Draug above Marth.
Okay. This is more flexibility with the reclass sips and everything?
Well, Draug actually does stuff for the game, and Marth just visits villages.
That's one
and
way
chests,
to phrase it.
Right?
Coming at you, Marth just runs around getting villages and chests. All right, I think Marth is very tough to evaluate because it's like a weird balance of you have to use this unit to throughout the whole game, or it's going to be a bigger pain, especially when you get to Medius, but even before that, some spots where you want to have a good Marth, not because Marth himself needs to, is helping, but because it makes it easier to not get a game over or whatever. But I think he's like solid statistically right, but he's never going to be one of your better units because of all the limitations that he has and all the places he has to go to. Whereas Draug is like an actual unit, a fast glass cannon.
Exactly. Doga got tired of choking points by this game. I think it's because of Gordon. He annoyed him too much.
Yeah, it's just out of
his
curiosity.
5 points and all that.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, what do you think is like a good build for Draug? Would you go like Pirate or Hunter or?
You know, Cavalier. Honestly, you can't go wrong with Cavalier. The thing is, and by the way, I don't know if you want to, instantly just tier Rodrick right now because he's the first in your interesting units category.
The waifu category.
But he is. Draug and Rodrick are very comparable in terms of just their overall role in the game and their stats too. Because if you look at their bases, Draug starts 5 levels higher, and if Rodrick gains 5 levels in prologue and they go into chapter 1 both level 6, Rodrick has higher averages in most of his stats, but he actually is still lacking in speed. And Draug is notably just faster than Rodrick is. All his other stats kind of like lag behind slightly, but the reason why I think that's important is, first of all, on higher difficulties, like speed is super important, and there really aren't that many units that are comfortable with doubling enemies with their base speed, and Draug is one of those that can like go to Pirate and then just like take a Rainbow Potion and one round stuff right off the bat. And the other reason is that if you want to train Rodrick, you are taking away EXP from someone else in prologue, and mostly that's going to be Luke, because that's mostly the person that's going to be taking away EXP from. And Luke is better than Rodrick. But if you want to use Draug, he's not taking away EXP from anyone unless you like decide to meme and not recruit Ogma in prologue 6.
I was about to say, like, you're assuming Draug just doesn't exist in prologue, right?
Right, even if he doesn't exist in prologue, but theoretically he can exist because it doesn't. I don't think it takes longer to beat his prologue 6 map unless you're like rigging crits, in which case it should still take just as long if you're rigging crits everywhere. But I don't think that losing Ogma actually costs you in terms of turn count in prologue, but it definitely feels bad because Draug in prologue on higher difficulties is kind of
like he can fight thieves and take no damage, but he's completely garbage against a lot of other enemy types, especially barbarians. I think that's what I remember.
Right, or on Lunatic, you can fight thieves and still take damage because your base defense, your personal base defense is 0.
Epic, yeah. Something about Luke and Brody that I've noticed whenever I play Lunatic myself is the units you have in prologue. They're like, it's like you get like Chris and Ceda and Ryan, and I feel like it always works out in a way where Chris does a bunch of work, like mostly on enemy phase. He's the one fighting stuff because everyone else like fucking dies or gets like their HP reduced to like 2. So Chris is the only one who wants to do that generally, and then people have to clean up after him. And then generally it works out in such a way that Luke is the one taking a kill because he has 1 range, and it just makes the most sense to reduce the damage the most you get, because otherwise you're gonna die. So Luke ends up cleaning up the kills. That's because of that. He's not even really like someone else could clean up just as well as he does, but because he is the one that always taking counter, he's the one that gets the kills that way, and that's why he's like easily trainable even on Lunatic, for example. Brody is like slightly worse at that because his stats I think are all around a bit worse, and his ranks are like reversed to a point where you'd rather use Luke than Brody for the most part. But I imagine that if that's your role, if you're just cleaning up stuff, then using Brody over using Brody can't be that much of a pain in the ass. But like, you definitely have to choose between one of the two. Like if you try to use both, they'll both get like half XP and they won't be able to snowball as much. So
right, you have to pick between one of them, and I think Rodrick is like, if you look at the end of the game, like end game stats, he averages better speed than Luke because his growth is higher, even though his base is one less. I think that's correct. I know that Rodrick has like just -1 bases compared to Luke, and a lot of weird stats that don't really make a whole lot of sense when they join at the same time. And they're supposed to be like kind of the red-green Cav pair. Yeah, he has 1 less base speed and 1 less base strength.
yeah,
And he has a negative base defense as well.
sounds like Draug.
Yeah. Well, Draug has 0 base defense at least, but he is 5 levels higher, so he does lag a little bit behind in defense by that point. But my point still is that
he's comparable, right?
That's that's like one minor advantage that Rodrick could have. But the problem is that you have 1, 2, 3 other really good lance users, like Pala, Katria, Sirius. They are all really good at using lances. Arran uses lances. Right, there is some utility in having a dedicated sword user. Like Luke likes to go Swordmaster for a lot of the game. So Rodrick, I mean, yeah, you can just reclass the Swordmaster, I suppose, but you kind of lose out a little bit of power from the extra weapon ranks that Luke would have. And I guess there is like some utility in having access to silver swords that Luke would have that Rodrick wouldn't. So in my opinion, Rodrick is like basically Draug except slightly worse. So
like right below him, basically, is where you are.
Yeah.
Right. So better than Marth. Okay. I wouldn't have thought that. I always like in my mind, I was always like Rodrick should be like, I don't know, C or something. The only thing I really knew about him is like worse than Luke. But the question is always how much worse than Luke. And this,
he just feels bad to use because Luke exists and is better at every way to begin with.
Yeah.
But other than that, he's actually, I mean, he's not a bad unit. Like if you decide to just dedicate EXP to him instead of Luke at the beginning, then he'll still turn out fine. Yeah. But the fact that there is that opportunity cost, whereas Draug doesn't have the opportunity cost, means that, in my opinion, I think Draug is the slightly better unit.
Draug, same utility, but for free. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Any other travesties that we have to address before this thing explodes in travestiness?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of like suggestions for the lower tiers, but they're lower tier units, so I don't know how much you care about them. Maybe we can save them for a later video. But the major proposal that I have, which I don't know if you are agreeable with, is to split up C tier to a C plus and a C minus, because in my opinion, there are units in C tier that are definitely like a cut above the other units in C tier, either in terms of their long-term utility or just like their immediate utility. And like, for example, I just don't really think that George or Balfour Leiden are exactly in the same tier as like Navarre.
Okay. I mean,
right.
I said before that the reason that I no longer have splits in most of my tier lists right now is because they require a lot of nuancing between the units. If these units, like, if they feel like they're cut above, I do think it's important to ask the question if units maybe belong in D when they're in C, if they belong in B when they're in C. But if you feel like C tier is an apt description for most of these, but there just should be difference between them, I'm definitely okay with splitting it up again in C plus and C minus.
Yeah, it's just that I feel there's enough of a difference between the units that are within C tier that do not apply to the units within B tier or A tier or even S tier.
Okay.
I guess S tier, like you could argue that Katria is not really an S plus unit, but like you know, in B tier, I can look at all of them and be like, okay, like they're pretty
roughly comparable. Yeah,
roughly comparable. In C tier, I'm like, okay, you have Balfour Leiden in one place, and then like Navarre in another place, and you know, I don't really think that they are quite comparable, but they're not as bad as D tier, because D tier you have jokers like, I don't know, like
basically the free silver tier
plus
a couple of early game pre-promoted, or not pre-promoted, but like Castor and Board.
Yeah, it really depends on how you want to stratify the lower class of units, I guess, because like the distinguishing features between D, E, and F tier units are fairly minimal compared to distinguishing features between like a C plus and a C minus tier unit. So you could argue that like a C minus tier unit should actually be D tier, right? But then they actually look like they're really low on the list. Because like D tier kind of implies that you probably shouldn't really ever use them, like even if you kind of wanted to. But there are units that are in the bottom of C tier that are pretty usable.
Yeah, I agree. I always felt like, for example, Kane and Navarre and Ogma, they feel pretty similar to me, first of all, and then they seem to have some okay potential, whereas these, it's got a couple free silvers and it's got a couple dudes from the early game that are like just not really worth using at all. So, alright, well, I'll split them up. That seems fine to me. So, I'm assuming you just want the unit that are low right now to just go in there. But I'm curious where exactly you would make the split.
Would draw the cutoff at Barst. Like, Barst and below to a C- tier. Because those are units that are, like, not entirely usable off the bat. Whereas C+ tier are units that either are kind of usable off the bat or they have some long-term potential. And then one more change here is I would recommend putting Ryan up to C+ tier above Cecil.
Okay. And is that for similar reasons for like Rhodey, for example, where it's like, okay, you can train him in Prologue, it has an opportunity cost, but he turns out alright? Because I used to think Ryan was one of the better units in this game, but then I learned that like people just like the other units that are available in Prologue and trainable better.
You know, if you ask certain people, they would actually rank Ryan above Rodrick.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. My thoughts are, so first of all, if you are accounting for lower difficulties, being unable to have an enemy phase is kind of a big deal because you can't just steamroll across all the enemies and go lol. Right? And a hard one, you definitely could do that with someone like Luke or Rhodey if they got trained enough. But Ryan, probably not. On higher difficulties, that's where Ryan, you could argue, pulls ahead of Rodrick.
Well, yeah, because it basically becomes like player phase based instead of enemy phase based, or yeah, like that.
Yeah, and Ryan has okay stats going into the later portion of the game. It used to be that the way you used Ryan was you eventually build him to Horseman, but if you look at his growths, his speed growth is pretty. I mean, it's just okay, and he wants to be in Hunter most of the time when he's unpromoted, which actually is -5 speed growth compared to Archer, despite Archer having shittier stats in every category. I know, right? It is a little odd, but like Ryan actually needs to be average or above average in speed in order to actually hit benchmarks as a Horseman, and you also need to like make sure you dedicate him a lot of kills. So I think in practice, without the extreme favoritism, Ryan doesn't really work out quite as well as he used to in theory, but he is definitely still a viable, like long-term 7th platoon member, similar to Cecil. And Cecil, of course, is probably in the right place just because she's like a worse version of Rodrick.
Yeah,
because joins later and has like a -3 base personal defense, which,
she gets one shot.
There's a certain threshold at which A, you get one shot, and B, on lunatic mode, there's like a bulk threshold where you can take a hit and then get healed and then still be able to take one more hit.
Oh, that's right, because low healing things, yeah.
Exactly. But Cecil doesn't meet that threshold.
Yeah, she's like, someone hits her and then she has to get healed twice to take another hit. That's pretty awful. Yeah. One more thing I wanted to say about Ryan is I think he's kind of suffering when it comes to training him. I think he kind of suffers from the reverse thing that I discussed earlier with Luke and then Rodrick to a lesser extent, where it makes sense to feed kills to them because they have the 1 range. So if you don't give him a kill on like hard 3 and below, then you would just take an extra counter. Like if you have an enemy that has 1 range and you've taken with him first, with Ryan first, then you can finish him off with Luke and you haven't taken any damage. But if you go the reverse way around it, Ryan gets the kill XP, but Luke is taking damage for really no reason. So I think in a way that hurts him, but it's kind of unfair to penalize him for that. Like you're basically penalizing him for being able to avoid counterattacks, but it's still something that happens in practice, which I've always found a little tough to evaluate. I don't know if you can relate to that or not, but I always find that kind of funny.
Yeah, I think that was something that I experienced when I was playing FE7 a while back, actually. Where
with
I was
Rebecca?
like, yeah, I'm going to train Rebecca. Oh, wait, I should just chip things with her and then like kill stuff with, I don't know, Eliwood.
Yeah.
Or Lowen, who are better units to begin with.
Yeah.
That's like the problem with early game archers in general, which is you want to chip, you don't want to kill, and you don't have an enemy phase, or EXP gain is completely shit.
Yeah, the only way around it is like to have other people chip for them, and then they take the kill on player phase, which you still like lose out on chip utility, but at least you can feed them kills. But then you get the problem where they gave early game archers such bad stats they can't even like kill anything. Like Rebecca can't kill anything that Lowen or Ellie would have weakened, and I think Ryan sometimes experiences the same thing. The other thing about Ryan that I really hate is, like you said earlier, he doesn't have an enemy phase. I think that goes beyond just not being able to counter. He just gets one-rounded by a lot of things beyond like Prologue 4 or something. Like, I think just one-shot him or double him because his archer base is so trash, which I've always really hated.
If he hasn't gained speed by then, I think, on lunatic mode, he does get one-rounded by some enemies.
It makes Prologue 5 really tough sometimes, the one where you get Merrick, because the enemies just, you have to like shield him from everything in order to do anything. Okay. Any other big travesties that we gotta go over?
I propose moving Rocher, Samto, or Samuel, Ubello, and Rad down to F tier.
Okay, so is this because they're that bad? Okay.
Yes.
Curious you say that Rocher should go, but not Setgar and Wolf.
Rocher's so slow.
That much slower?
He's so slow. He's so slow.
So awful. I think when I tiered him, I made a whole point about how if you're like, people sometimes get annoyed when I tier people units low. Because they're like, well, if you're playing on this difficulty, it's fine. But no matter what difficulty you're playing on, if you compare Rocher to everyone else, he's still going to look so bad. Like, it doesn't matter what difficulty you're playing on, he's that bad.
Oh, wait, actually, he's not that much slower than Sucker or Wolf. He's actually in the middle in terms of speed. But actually, the main difference between them is that he has 3 less defense at base. Yeah.
But does he get, like, one shot?
No, but, like, you know how I used Wolf that one time in Chapter 20X?
Yeah, I remember that. That's part of what made me, like, put him above Rocher.
Yeah. So you can't do that with Rocher because he has 3 less defense. I mean, he has less bulk than like Daros, right? And there are plenty of units that are bulkier than he. Like even Astrum has better physical bulk.
Oh god, the guy that gets run out by thieves, yeah.
Yeah, and Astrum has like 4 higher base defense and 4 lower base HP. So if he gets like his 2-hit bulk is 4 higher than Rocher. So Rocher doesn't really have any redeeming qualities, right? He's basically just like Stryker and Wolf, but if you want them to do something funny, they can't.
I think that I also like about these two is they have bow rank, which seems more useful for the trash unit than the lance rank that Rocher has.
Yes, I agree. Unless you give them like a Mega Forge to one shot.
Yeah, that's something like everyone can do, and if you're gonna do that, they're still gonna be the worst at it because their stats are gonna be worse, especially Rocher, because like I don't think his stats stand out in any way. Like something like accuracy, for example, is something I'm sure he's not very good at either. So you're saying Rocher, Samto, Rad?
Rad Quetz.
Rad Quetz, oh no. I forgot it was better or worse than Samto. Caesar?
I honestly don't care. And then Ubello.
Caesar as well?
Caesar's notably better than Rad. That's the thing, right?
Wow. Impossible.
Like Caesar, better bases, better base level. I think actually worse growths, but at that point, it's the bases that matter. Okay, Caesar has 10% less strength growth.
Oh shit!
With the same speed. The same speed growth as Rad.
Such a small difference. Like I don't really care about that. I'm fine with.
It's such a small difference, but yeah, but Caesar has like 2 higher base HP, strength, the same base speed, and 2 higher base defense, 2 higher base skill, 5 higher base luck. So he's less likely to get randomly one shot by stuff. And a base level of 7 instead of 5.
Okay, so it's close to promotion, and it's like at the point where people really want to promote, so I can see that being very valuable.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm down with this. I don't know. I thought Bantu was pretty bad because he just has no flexibility whatsoever, and he gets deleted by everything, but these guys have nothing to make him stand out either, so I'm okay with this. I remember comparing Samto to like everyone. I think I compared him to Castor, and Castor was all around better even though he joins earlier. I think a higher level too. It's really insane. Or like same-ish level maybe, but like he was so much better, and it was Castor of all people. Like if you're that much worse than Castor, cringe.
Yeah, Bantu definitely has no options to salvage him. Like with all of the other human units, you can reclass them into funky stuff and forge funny, ridiculous forges. But that really shouldn't be like a delineating quality between an E and an F tier, in my opinion.
I agree. It's fine with me. I've seen people make Bantu work. Like you mentioned before, we're gonna do this. Like someone's gonna pop up in the comments like, actually, I made this unit work on Lunatic by giving him a funny forge and doing this and that and that. Like just with Bantu, I know there's been people who have used him because he stands out. Like there's probably someone who's done it, but there's no way it's applicable in any way to this tier list. Okay, so any other big travesties, or should we do like 1 or 2 couple interesting units to round it off?
Let's just go with new units, because I think people are at this point are not only tired of FE12, but probably tired of me nitpicking over little things like the lower tiers.
No, that's why they're here. If they're still here at this point, they're here for that. But okay,
sure.
Okay, you said you had some notes prepared on certain units. So I'm curious to hear one of them.
Yeah, the ones that you had kind of indicated that we would be tiering. So most of the stuff in interesting. There's a couple that I didn't really have anything prepared for, but we'll just start off with Gaggles, Gordon.
Gaggles, yeah. So we should probably assume he has no prologue utility because there's no reason to get him instead of Athena.
Right.
So and then you don't have him, so you get him in chapter 1 with like kind of still cringy bases, but he has like what debow still, so that's like at least moderately useful for a couple chapters. You get like one hunter slot at that point, and what I usually do, I think, is either him or Ryan goes in hunter, the other one stays in archer, and then you forge like a giant bow and you shoot down wyverns. I don't remember if you like try to one shot them or just do a lot of damage and then you can kill him with someone else, which might be better if you're not using him in one turn. And then I feel like long term is pretty bad. I remember his growth not being really able to hold up. I think his growths are like almost the same as Shadow Dragons, which is not very good. So I wouldn't. I feel like if you're gonna rank him for like a sufficient play, it should probably be based on short term, but maybe his long term should be weighed in there somewhere as well. But he doesn't feel like a long term unit to me. Just kind of an okay unit for the early chapters. His
personal speed growth is 10%. So yeah, that is all you need to say about that.
Gaming.
Yeah.
Gaming.
So, I mean, he is functionally, like, even if you didn't train Ryan at all in the prologue, Ryan can do basically what Gordon does at the very beginning of the game anyway, especially on lower difficulty where you don't need a Mega Forge. So he should really just be like C- tier. Somewhere in C- tier. I don't really know.
Yeah. So it's like the difference between like a unit with no potential and a unit with some potential, I guess, basically. And then like prologue utility. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to instinctively say I feel like these units have better, I don't know about better bases. Maybe it's just because it's fucking Gordon, but I want to put him below for some reason. But then again, these units don't do much in the early game compared to Gordon. I guess Ogma kind of does. He has prologue utility. Maybe Ogma should be above Barst for that alone, actually.
Kane also has a prologue utility, right? He exists for a chapter. And actually, it's a bulkiest unit in Prologue 8 if you don't have Night Crits.
Shall we just move Barst and Frostblow them then? Maybe that makes sense.
Sure. Go ahead. It's your tier list.
This is my tier list. I'm just starting to make sure I don't say anything super stupid then. Okay. All right.
Isn't that why we're here?
Yeah.
For Mekkah to say Conquest Sizo things?
Yes, exactly. We're here to avoid that again. Did you know that Horus joins in Chapter 12X?
Chapter 12X, Etzel and Shadow Dragon?
Yes, exactly. Oh, I said Horus, which is the right one, but I meant to say the wrong one. See, there you go. That's why you're here. All right, exactly. Okay, you happy with this one?
All right. Next, Malicia is the brainest, deadest tiering.
S tier? Easy S tier?
The easiest S tier.
The easiest S tier. I can see it.
The easiest S tier.
I used to not realize how good she was, and then I realized, you know what? Staff is really good in this game, and she gets a lot of good stabs, and she has hammering as well. It's like getting Safi in this game, I feel like. Except you don't have warp on higher difficulties, but you still have hammering, which is super good. And then like I was first like, what do you use with hammer? Now you could repair good forges, I guess. Oh wait, you get a rescue staff. Good shit.
If you're LTCing, you repair rescue. If you're playing casually, you can just repair your Mega Forges, I guess.
Your Mekkah Forges?
And save a lot of money.
Okay. Right? So if she's like the brain deadest S tier, is she also one of the worst S tiers or one of the best S tiers?
So that's an interesting question because she provides pretty unique utility, right?
Yeah,
like you could argue it this way, whereas like you have 5 combat units, but you only have 1 Malicia who can use Hammer. But without the staff user, without a combat unit, your staff user alone isn't going to do anything. So she's kind of like Fina in that respect, where without an actual unit to actually do stuff with, the support unit can't actually function. But she is she is more unique than like your first or your second or third combat unit. So probably like above Fina.
Yeah, instinctively I was thinking at least better than Katria. But I feel like Ala and the Chris's stand out so much compared to everyone else that it's not fair to put her above. And like compared to Fina, the first thing I think of when comparing her to Fina is just she has more chapters of utility than Fina does. So if their utility is equal, which you can argue about, but if it is, then she should be better by default. If you can argue that Fina's dancing is much better than her staffing, I would argue Fina could be better. But the thing is, I think Fina will often be dancing for Malicia because her actions are so important. And it's like the way I play Fire Emblem, the way I play this game at least, I feel like that will happen a lot because you'll just have like, you're playing FE12, you constantly have the Danger Zone button turned on Lunatic just because you don't want people to die. And then these two can spend a lot of time outside of that zone where the enemies come. And that makes it easier to dance for her. So this is the way I think that works best. But it's always comparing apples to oranges with these kind of units.
One more thing about Malicia, which I don't know if people do nowadays in the modern meta, but it used to be that Malicia was a pretty good Garnuff killer too, because she gets a lot of EXP just from spamming staves, and you promote her, and then you become a Sage, and then you arm scroll to C, and you can use Starlight.
Sage have D tomes at base?
Sage starts with D, yes. Okay. So you could do that if you don't want to, like, drug up Katarina or train Linde
Or make a giant T formation and rescue past Garnet.
Exactly. Yeah, or do like the weirdest rescue shuffle manip that you can do.
Okay.
So even more reason for her to be S tier.
Yeah, as if she didn't have reason enough. Sure thing. Okay. So
is Blonde Cord.
Blonde Cord, yeah. The thing about him is like it's just another unpromoted unit with like no good weapon rank speed. I guess he has like debows for helping with the Mega Forge and killing stuff, and then that's kind of it for him. It's like similar to Gordon, but he's in the other class set, which doesn't matter because we have merged class sets, so he has like no real personal base to speak of. I think he's like units like this. I kind of see him like the same way as see like Cord. I don't know, not really Mathis, but like Castor, I guess, was like they don't really stand out in any way, shape, or form besides the rank. That's all they have. I'm kind of like
and also looking like Cord.
Yeah, that's like, how did they get away with that? Like, what the hell?
Being a Cord recolor, yeah.
They just dyed his hair blonde. That's all they did. So I was thinking like, wait. I mean, Gordon, I seem like similar to Gordon, except he doesn't have chapter 1 and then the prologue, but we're not counting the prologue for Gordon because we're never recruiting him. So it's really just chapter 1 and then like a part of chapter 2. But then chapter 2 and 3 are like the peak for those kind of units where all they have is bow rank and they shoot down all the Wyvern Riders. So maybe it's still like semi-comparable, but I'm still leaning towards D for him over Gordon for some reason because he doesn't have chapter 1. Does that make sense, or is that like too much for a tier difference?
I think that's too much for a tier difference. Yeah. And would you be surprised if I said that Warren has a higher speed growth than Gordon?
I mean,
by 5%. So it's still trash. It's still trash. It's not going to make a difference. But Warren has the same base speed as Gordon does too. I guess Gordon's advantage is that he has higher base strength, so you can forge 1 less on a bow, and he'll do the same damage as Warren with that extra 1 might forge. But otherwise, fundamentally, they're identical. So I don't really see a reason why they have to be in different tiers.
Yeah, maybe it's because I'm used to them being in different class sets that I was thinking that because. But then again, he has the better class set, so I don't know what's thinking. Okay, so below Gordon, I guess. I mean, you're not making multiple forges, right? You're making 1 forge and you're trading it between them. But I guess it just means that Gordon does 1 more damage. So that's probably enough for him to be the better one. Because like either way, one of them will probably be Hunter, one of them will probably be Archer if you're using them both for this kind of utility. But there's no way to decide which one that should be here.
They can both be Hunter because when Warren joins,
he joins, right.
Gives you +1.
Yeah, he is
Hunter class slot. Yeah, right. So double Hunters.
Yeah,
Hunter's Volley.
Yeah, Gordon can be a Hunter, but he deprives Ryan of the Hunter slot.
Oh no, not Ryan.
Warren doesn't. Blonde Cord doesn't do that.
Blonde Corin. Wait,
yes.
What?
Yeah, this is. I customized the Fate's avatar to look exactly like him. Don't judge me.
Exactly.
Okay. What about brown-haired Warren?
So I didn't actually do any like review beforehand on Cord.
We could skip him then if you want to.
Yeah,
you might have something to say about some of the other units.
Well, somewhere in E tier is where I would say, but we can save him for later because I didn't really have anything. There's not a whole lot to say because he's trash, but
that's the thing is like. That's the thing about the mixed tier in this game so hard is people who are trash have literally nothing to go on, whereas everyone else is like some kind of unique joining situation or some kind of unique class or unique weapon or something. In this game, everyone is like, okay, you're a mill unit with these weapon ranks. That's all the unique thing. Your base stats, I guess. That's like almost all you have to go on for everything.
All right. Okay. Julian, I did account for. Julian, in my opinion, should go to the top of D tier.
Ooh, that's an interesting place. I was like expecting C or B or something, but I guess he competes for chess utility with 2 other units, which is a lot. And then not many chests that he can uniquely get.
Like efficient playthroughs completely disregard Julian.
I mean, like this could be Rickard, right?
Yeah, and Rickard by extension.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously because it takes like, I don't know, 7 turns or something crazy like that to actually recruit Julian, but
yeah, I try not to factor in recruitment cost, though.
Yeah, like notwithstanding the recruitment cost, the point more is that they found ways to get what they need without Julian, and it's not really any slower. Which is why...
So like the Thief Staff and then some Master Keys, I assume.
Thief Staff, Marth with clever use of the Rescue Staff as well.
Oh yeah, he just kind of goes somewhere, you have your healer run up to the seize point. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then Master Keys and just... disregarding a lot of items that aren't that useful.
That's fair. So better than free silver, but like not a whole lot of unique utility left then.
Yeah, because if you do have Julian, you might as well just use him for that utility, and he's perfectly okay at that. And I guess the one thing that he does get you, which you probably wouldn't have otherwise, is there's like a bullion in chapter 6 in the bottom right room that sometimes Rickard starts in, depending on if you recruited him or not. And if you don't have a thief, then you're probably not going to get that unless you take a lot of extra turns and move Marth there, and then rescue him back up.
That makes sense.
By that point, you'll be facing reinforcements that like Norn and Frey are leading in. So, like I think efficient runs skip that bullion, but you can argue that 10,000 gold for a pretty hefty forge does give him some minor utility in a more casual setting.
Yeah, it's a pretty good way to contribute if you're an otherwise kind of unremarkable unit, because this is a game where you can really convert gold into something useful like that. Okay. Any other units that have been noted on?
Let's just move Rickard below Julian.
Oh, good idea. It's basically the same.
it's the same unit pretty much.
Yeah, because like there's no thieving for Julian to do before Rickard joins, so they're basically the same thing, and their combat doesn't really matter. That's fair.
Yep.
Alrighty then. How about we do one more?
All right, let's do Yulia.
Julia.
She's probably one of the best of the remaining units.
Yeah, so she doesn't have the unique hammer that Malicia has, but there's still a lot of staff utility in this game. I find staff utility in this game like fascinating because I love the low amount of HP you heal with physic and heal, but I know you really like it because it really makes minute details and like exact strategizing work so well. It's just really annoying for me when I play casually and just have to take like 5 turns off to heal someone to full HP, but it works really well. And then, you know, just early joining unit with a high staff rank and the ability to rescue Marth, for example, or heal someone with physic to make sure they get like 3 shot instead of 2 shot. That seems really useful. My instinctive take would be an A or B tier, but I find it hard to evaluate her utility exactly.
So I think the best way to rank her is to compare her to units that are already on the list, which are Wendell and Etzel, who kind of do what she already does in a different flavor.
So you left them alone, so I'm assuming you think they're at least reasonably accurately tiered.
Yeah, especially if we're considering like hard 2. If we're considering higher difficulty, they might be a little bit lower because there's no warp. But if you do consider warp, then they should be a higher tier, like where they are right now. And also on lower difficulties, Etzel especially does really well reclassing the Sword Master and using 11 Sword and taking like Capricorn and some of the other plus magic shards, because he can actually one-round stuff for a few chapters after he joins with that build. I think like when I used him in 0% growths, he one-rounded like that soldier that stands in front of the door in chapter 16, 15, 16,
the
16.
one where you have to like open a door to get through to the throne?
Yeah. Or the one where it's like if you open the chest, the boss is like, ha ha ha, they fell into my trap. After them, fools. Yeah. Okay. Something like that. Yeah. So, and then Wendell, you know, he has Excalibur. So I think like if you compare their relative advantages, Yulia joins in chapter 4, but she has her own little mini game that she has to play in her corner of the map. So I don't know how much you want to count that really, because
you mean the part where she like gets people up there with rescue staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird because it's so forced on you that it feels like it's almost not even part of her kit. But at the same time, it is something she does.
Yeah. And then she's got 5, 6, and 6X doesn't really count all that much unless you're rescuing, but Wendell also exists in 6X. So she has 2 chapters of availability on Wendell and a few more on Etzel. And then compared to what Wendell has, so Wendell starts off promoted, right? First of all, Yulia doesn't actually have rescue utility, in my opinion, because rescue is a unit staff in this game, so anyone can reclass to cleric, curate, or bishop.
And then you want it to be like a promoted one to have more range. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want, if the like individual squares of movement matter, then you want it to be promoted. So it's going to be like Wendell or Arran reclass to bishop, and not Yulia.
Yeah.
And if you want the EXP, oftentimes what people can do is they can like reclass Ceda to curate if she's not going to level up, and then just use the rescue staff for free, like 40-90 XP. So you don't really want that on Yulia because she doesn't gain all that much from leveling up. So she doesn't really have rescue utility in this game. It's mostly just physic. And Wendell, you know,
she has CF base, right? So yeah.
Yeah, she has CS base. Wendell does not, but Wendell can reclass to bishop, use the staff 8 times, and you get a barrier staff in chapter 6. So he's gonna spam barrier 8 times, and then he's able to physic basically just as well as Yulia can. except he has a bit extra because he can Excalibur if he. I guess you can't Physic and Excalibur at the same time unless you use your staff a lot, but you have the option of going to Excalibur in a given chapter. So in my opinion, like Wendell is, -2 chapters of ability, but starts promoted and can Excalibur if needed, and generally can Physic around when you want to, whereas Yulia just can Physic, and then, once you have 2 statues who can Physic, do you really need a 3rd statue who can Physic?
I mean, that depends on how much damage you're taking, how much in demand it is, but I can definitely see where it would be superfluous to deploy her, especially because you could deploy it on another unit that would help in combat some more. So it sounds like you're making the case for at least putting her like below Wendell, maybe even a tier lower.
Yeah, I think she should be in B tier somewhere, like somewhere in the Arran to Rodrick kind of range of units, right? I'll still argue her over Marth because that early Physic, the early double Physic definitely can be helpful at times, but especially on like my hard 2 playthrough, the 0% gross, I found that she was largely interchangeable with Wendell, or that Wendell just often did her job, but better. And she doesn't have enough of a staff rank lead on Wendell unless you promote her to where she can become a Fortify user later in the game on like Lunatic, right? Because on Lunatic you don't have Warp, but it's replaced by Fortify staff. That's actually pretty important because that's like how you mitigate the massive amounts of damage that you take. But usually by that point in the game, the only unit that you have who can Fortify is Malicia, unless you kind of played a little bit slowly and grinded Yulia's staff rank, in which case she could also probably Fortify too. But then if you play extra slowly, you could grind Wendell's staff rank and he can Fortify. So it's like...
Comes out of the same thing, yeah. I do remember you did heavily grind staff rank on like almost everyone, but it's because your late game looked like Thracia. So you need like all the staff use you can get, including human.
Yeah. I mean, she is able to use a new staff against staff. However, people want to localize it now because Shadows of Valencia localize it differently. But like she is one of the prime candidates for that. But again, Wendell can do that too. Yeah. And you don't really need Malicia, Wendell, and Yulia.
Yeah. I think staff utility in particular is really hurt by the diminishing returns in that way because you only need to warp Physic or a new so many times within a chapter. And if you have like 2 units, the 3rd really doesn't add very much. Whereas for combat units, I feel like that's almost always something for them to do at least, especially in this game. So I think that definitely does hurt her. So I will just put her over Marth, I guess. I'm not sure about Rodrick and Draug because it's like super difficult to compare what these do versus what these do, or what she does. But this seems good to me. That's all right. Okay, wow. Mostly you talked for over an hour over New Mystery, but hey, that's actually really interesting to listen to. I'm glad you did that. Are you down to continue this another time for some other interesting boys?
Sure.
Nice.
We can shuffle around some like lower tier units too that need fixing. But...
yes. It's definitely important that we tier Wolf and Setgar appropriately, according to their exact stats and math out. Cool stuff. This is definitely, like, listening to this definitely made me, like, play FE12 again and see if I can figure it out. Because this is a game that, like, I always, like, play it for a while, and it's like I get to chapter 4 or 5 or 6 or so, and I'm like, dude, I want to do something else. Oh my god, it's so hard.
Too much thinking. Too
much thinking, exactly. It's too much thinking my strategy game. I just want to go burr. I just want to give Hawkeye a hand axe and kill everything. That's why I play FE7 so much. Alright, well, thank you for joining us, Dondon. And we'll see you all next time. Peace around.
Alright, goodbye, casuals.